The night had been quiet, too quiet for Emily Carter. The rain outside her Seattle home tapped against the windows like small reminders of everything she was trying to ignore. The house felt far larger than it needed to be, especially with her husband Daniel away for work again. He had been gone for weeks this time, and even though Emily understood his responsibilities, the silence around her had been growing heavier each day. Emily tried to distract herself by keeping busy. She cleaned the kitchen twice, organized the mail, folded laundry with unnecessary precision. But the distraction didn't last. The loneliness had been building for months, forming a tight knot inside her chest that she could no longer pretend wasn't there. She walked into her bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let herself feel everything she had been holding back. At first, it was just a small sigh. Then her breath trembled. Then tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She buried her face in her hands, embarrassed that she was falling apart over something she couldn't clearly explain. It wasn't only Daniel's absence. It was the feeling of carrying the emotional weight of the house, the responsibilities, the effort to keep things together, all while feeling unseen. The exhaustion wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something she didn't know how to name. Emily didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear the soft footsteps in the hallway. She didn't know that Luke, her 19-year-old stepson, had returned home from college earlier than expected. He had texted her that afternoon about coming home for the weekend. But she had been so distracted that she forgot to keep her phone with her. Luke had always been gentle, respectful, and calm, but he had also learned to keep his feelings to himself. After his parents divorced years ago, he became someone who watched silently instead of asking questions. Emily had always tried to build a relationship with him without forcing anything. And slowly, over the years, they developed a quiet understanding. She saw him as part of her heart, even if she never used those words. When Luke walked upstairs and passed by her half-open bedroom door, he froze. He heard the soft sound of her sobbing, and the image of Emily, usually composed, warm, and steady-looking, so fragile, stopped him cold. It was startling because he had never seen her break, not once. For a second, he hesitated. Maybe she wanted privacy. Maybe he shouldn't get involved. But something about the way her shoulders shook, the way her hands pressed against her eyes, made him step forward. He tapped lightly on the door, not wanting to scare her. "Emily," he said gently, "are you okay?" She jumped slightly, surprised to hear his voice. She quickly wiped her face and tried to straighten up, but her eyes were still red and teary. She forced a small smile, the kind that tried to hide everything in a single breath. "Luke," she said, her voice soft and shaky. "I didn't hear you come in. I'm fine, sweetheart, just emotional today." Luke could tell she wasn't fine. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her voice had the sound of someone who had been carrying too much alone. But he didn't rush inside. He didn't make it awkward. He simply opened the door a little more and stepped in slowly, making sure she was comfortable. He walked to the small armchair in her room, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough to show he wasn't walking away. He sat down, resting his arms on his knees, watching her with concern that felt older than his age. "You don't look fine," he said softly. "You look like you've been hurting for a while." Emily's throat tightened. She wasn't used to being confronted with truth spoken so gently. She wasn't used to someone noticing. "I'm just tired," she said quickly, trying once again to minimize her emotions. "It's nothing, really. You don't need to worry." But Luke didn't believe that, and he didn't pretend to. "You've taken care of everyone for so long," he said. "Let someone take care of you for once." Emily looked at him, stunned by the sincerity in his voice. She never expected comfort to come from him, of all people. She thought she had been hiding her feelings. Well, but the fact that Luke saw through her made the tears return quiet. Fragile, honest Dot. She covered her mouth and whispered, "I'm sorry you had to see me like this." "You don't need to apologize," he replied softly. "Everyone has moments like this." His tone wasn't pitying. It wasn't patronizing. It was steady, warm, and real. Hearing it made something inside Emily unclench for the first time in months. She took a deeper breath. Not quite steady, but steadier than before. "The house feels too quiet without your dad," she finally admitted. "And I keep trying to carry everything on my own. Some days it feels like I'm invisible." Luke nodded slowly, his expression full of empathy. "You're not invisible," he said. "Not to me." For a brief moment, the room felt different. Not heavy with sadness anymore, but filled with a quiet understanding. Emily didn't feel judged. She didn't feel weak. She felt supported. She wiped her cheeks again and managed a small smile. "Thank you, Luke." "Really?" He gave a small nod, as if reassuring her that she wasn't alone. Even in the moment she thought no one noticed. Emily didn't know it yet. But this moment, this unexpected opening of her heart, was going to change the direction of everything that followed. She had been holding herself together alone for too long. And now someone had finally stepped into the silence beside her. Someone who cared. Someone who listened. Someone who saw her, and that was the night everything quietly shifted. Luke remained seated in the armchair, watching Emily with a calm, steady expression that felt strangely grounding. The room was dim, lit only by the warm glow of the bedside lamp. Outside, the rain softened to a quiet drizzle, making the moment feel almost suspended in time, like the world had slowed down just enough for Emily to breathe again. Emily took in a long breath, letting the weight in her chest settle. She hadn't planned to fall apart, and she certainly hadn't expected Luke to see her in that vulnerable moment. Yet, instead of embarrassment, she felt something else: relief. Relief that the mask she had worn for months could finally slip without shattering her entirely. Luke leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily," he said gently, "you don't have to pretend for me. You've been holding a lot inside. Anyone would break under that pressure." Emily looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring unconsciously. "I didn't want to worry anyone, especially you. You already have college, your own life, your own responsibilities." He shook his head. "That doesn't mean I can't care." His tone was surprisingly firm, but still warm. It reminded Emily of Daniel when he used to reassure her before the distance, before the constant travel, before the long stretches of silence that made her question whether she mattered as much as she used to. Emily swallowed hard. "I guess I didn't realize how lonely I've been." And it sounds so dramatic saying it out loud. "It's not dramatic," Luke said quickly. "It's honest." Didn't look away from her. Unlike many adults who dismissed emotions as weakness, Luke simply listened. And his listening was steady, patient, mature beyond his years. Emily felt her eyes burn again, but she blinked the tears back. She didn't want to fall apart twice in front of him. She had always been the one everyone leaned on, the one who kept holidays running smoothly, who made Luke's favorite meals, who managed schedules and bills and the quiet emotional labor no one saw. The idea of being the one who needed help felt strange, almost uncomfortable. "You've always handled everything so well," Luke continued. "I think people forget you're human too." Emily looked up, her gaze soft, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Luke hesitated for a moment, then added, "I noticed things felt different around the house lately. You smile, but it looks heavy." His ability to read her so clearly startled her. "You notice that?" "I notice more than people think," he said with a small shrug. "And you've always been there for me. You didn't have to be, but you were." Emily's heart warmed. She remembered the early days when Luke was shy around her, unsure about accepting her place in his life. She worked slowly, patiently, building trust, little by little. She never pushed him. She simply showed up at school events, at his baseball games, during his first heartbreak, during his college applications. And slowly, he understood she wasn't trying to replace anyone. She was trying to support him. Hearing him acknowledge that now made her chest tighten with emotion. "I didn't think you noticed," Emily said softly. Luke smiled a little, almost shyly. "I did, and I still do," she inhaled shakily, feeling something inside her shift, a mix of gratitude, surprise, an emotional vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She finally whispered, "I miss your dad. I miss how things used to be. I feel like I'm living with half my heart gone." Luke nodded slowly. "I get that. When my parents split, I felt like my whole world got torn in two. It takes time to feel whole again." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had always seen him as the quiet, strong type. But she never realized how deeply he understood heartbreak himself. Emily's shoulders softened. The tension that had been building for months slowly unwound. Talking to Luke felt surprisingly natural, almost comforting. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was dragging her emotions behind her like a heavy suitcase. She felt like someone was helping her carry it. Luke leaned back slightly but stayed engaged. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said. "You don't have to pretend everything is perfect." Emily nodded, her throat tightening. "I think I've been pretending so long I forgot how to say I'm not okay." "Well, you just did," he said gently. She let out a small laugh, soft, shaky, but genuine. It felt good to laugh again, even for a moment. Luke smiled too, relieved to see the expression on her face. There was a long pause, but not an uncomfortable one. The kind of pause where two people sit in the same emotional space, acknowledging each other without needing to fill the silence. Finally, Emily whispered, "Thank you for being here." "Luke, I'm glad I came home early," he said. "Maybe it happened for a reason." Emily met his eyes, and for a moment, they simply understood each other. Not as stepmother and stepson, not as people divided by age or roles, but as two human beings who had both experienced loneliness, loss, and emotional exhaustion to people who needed support, and unexpectedly found it in each other. The rain outside faded into a soft mist. The quiet in the room no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt calm, safe, balanced. Emily wiped the last traces of tears from her cheeks and exhaled. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like everything was slipping out of her hands. She felt grounded, anchored by a conversation she hadn't expected, and comfort she didn't know she needed. Luke stood up slowly. "If you need anything, anything at all, I'm here." Emily nodded, her voice soft. "I know," and she meant it. She watched him leave the room, closing the door gently behind him, leaving her with a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone anymore. The rain finally stopped by morning, but Emily still felt the weight of the previous night. Her eyes were still slightly swollen, though she tried her best to hide it behind a little makeup and a forced steadiness in her voice. She kept busy opening curtains, fixing the pillows in the living room, running the dishwasher, but the emotions lingered in the corners of her mind like soft shadows. She told herself everything was fine. She told herself she had simply needed to let it out. But deep inside, a knot of mixed emotions pulled at her relief from finally opening up. Guilt that she had cried in front of Luke, and a strange warmth that came from being truly seen. She didn't understand that last feeling yet, but she felt it every time she remembered how gently Luke had spoken to her. She was in the kitchen making tea when she heard footsteps. Luke walked in, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked like any other 19-year-old starting his morning. But his eyes carried something quieter, something thoughtful, as though he was still processing last night too. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," Emily replied, trying to sound normal, but Luke was good at noticing things. He always had been. He walked closer and leaned against the counter, studying her face gently. "You okay today?" Emily exhaled, giving up on pretending. "A little tired," she admitted, "but better." Luke nodded. "Good. You deserve to feel better." Emily felt her throat tighten again. She didn't want to cry, not today, not after everything. She took another sip of tea to steady herself. "You really helped me last night," she said quietly, "more than you know." "I'm glad," he replied. His voice wasn't dramatic or emotional, just sincere. And that sincerity felt like warmth on her tired heart. They stood in silence for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a soft understanding between them. Something unspoken but real, Emily finally sighed and sat at the small dining table. She motioned for him to sit too. Luke joined her, pulling out the chair beside hers. She hesitated before speaking. "I want to explain something," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Last night, I didn't plan to open up like that. I didn't mean to drag you into my feelings." "You didn't drag me," Luke said firmly. "I walked in because I care. No one should cry alone." The simplicity of that sentence made Emily's eyes sting again. She pressed her palm against her forehead, trying to hide the emotion building inside. "I forget that sometimes," she whispered. "I forget that people might care." Luke leaned forward, his expression serious but full of empathy. "I care," he said. "You've been in my life for years. You've helped me through things you don't even know you helped me with." Emily lifted her head, surprised. "Like what?" He looked down at his hands for a moment before answering. "When I started college, I felt completely lost. Everyone expected me to be fine, but I wasn't. You were the one who checked in with me every week. You were the one who reminded me I wasn't failing. You showed up for me even when I didn't ask." Emily blinked slowly. She had always supported Luke, but she never knew the impact it had on him. "I didn't know it meant that much," she said softly. "It did," Luke replied. "And last night, I wanted to be there for you the same way you've always been there for me." The honesty in his voice touched her deeply, deeper than she expected, deeper than she knew how to respond to at first. She reached out, almost without thinking, and placed her hand over his. It was a gentle gesture, nothing more. A simple thank you, a simple connection, something human and kind. Luke didn't pull away. He let her hand rest on his thumb, rushing lightly as if telling her it was okay. She was safe. He understood. For a brief moment, the room felt suspended, soft, calm, almost comforting. Emily felt something settle in her heart, something she hadn't felt in months. She wasn't alone. She finally said, "You're growing into a really good man. Luke, I'm proud of you." Luke looked up, eyes shining with quiet emotion. "Because I learned from good people," he said. "You're one of them." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest at those words: gratitude, pride, relief, and something more complicated that she didn't dare name because she didn't fully understand it. She took her hand back slowly, not wanting to make the moment awkward. But instead of feeling distant, the space between them felt filled with unspoken understanding. Luke leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "I just want you to know that you can talk to me," he said, "even about the things that scare you." She nodded, feeling her voice catch. "Thank you. Really?" The moment lingered quietly. Then Emily broke the silence with a small smile. "I guess I'm not as strong as I pretend to be." "You're strong," Luke corrected gently. "Just tired. There's a difference." Emily laughed softly, a sound that felt like sunlight after storm clouds. "You're wise for 19. Had a good teacher," he said, giving her a small grin. The morning felt different after that, lighter, calmer. Emily poured tea for him, and they talked about small things, ordinary things, everyday life. But behind every word hung the memory of the night before, the shared vulnerability, the understanding that had grown quietly between them. Later, when Emily went upstairs to put laundry away, she paused at the top of the stairs and closed her eyes for a moment. She replayed his words in her mind: "You're not invisible. Strong, I care." Each sentence felt like a soft touch on all the places inside her that had been aching. But the part she couldn't forget, the part that surprised her, comforted her, and scared her all at once, was how deeply she trusted him, and how natural it felt to open up to him. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what this new closeness meant. She didn't know where the path ahead would lead. But she knew one thing with complete clarity. Something between them had shifted, not in a wrong way, not in a dangerous way, in a human way, to people helping each other heal, and Emily wasn't sure she was ready for how much it meant to her. Emily woke up earlier than usual, the morning light stretching softly across her bedroom. For a moment she forgot everything: the crying, the conversation, the warmth in Luke's voice. But as soon as she sat up, the memories returned like a gentle wave. She felt calmer than she expected, but also nervous, unsure of what the day might bring after such an emotional night. She took a long breath, ran a hand through her hair, and forced herself to start her morning routine. She made the bed, folded the blanket, and tried to ground herself. She had finally opened up, finally said the truth out loud, and a part of her felt lighter. But another part, a quieter one, worried about what would happen next. Downstairs, she heard movement. Luke was up. She didn't know if she was ready to face him again, not because anything wrong had happened, but because she felt exposed, raw, seen in a way she wasn't used to. She walked into the kitchen slowly, trying not to overthink. Luke stood at the stove making scrambled eggs, moving with the relaxed calm he always carried in the morning. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Morning," he said softly. Emily smiled, grateful that he wasn't acting strange. "Morning." He offered her a plate, and she accepted it quietly. They sat across from each other, eating without much conversation, the comfortable silence surprising her. It felt almost peaceful, till the front door suddenly opened. A familiar voice echoed from the hallway. Luke. "Anyone home?" Emily froze. Luke stiffened slightly, but didn't look shocked. They both recognized the voice instantly. Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be home for another week. Emily's pulse quickened. She stood up so fast her chair made a soft scraping sound. A rush of emotions shot through her: relief, panic, guilt at feeling relief, and confusion so sharp it made her chest tighten. Luke quietly set down his fork. Daniel entered the kitchen, pulling his suitcase behind him. He looked tired, his hair messy from travel. But when he saw Emily, his eyes softened with immediate affection. "There you are," he said, walking to her with an exhausted smile. "I missed you." Emily forced a smile, her heart pounding too fast to control. She hugged him because it was the right thing to do, but her mind wasn't steady. The hug felt familiar, safe, yet layered with everything she hadn't said, everything she had bottled up for months. Luke looked away respectfully, giving them a moment. Daniel stepped back and looked around. "I thought I'd surprise you both." "I got an early flight." Emily nodded, unable to find a steady response. "We weren't expecting you," she finally managed. Daniel laughed lightly. "That's the point of a surprise." But Emily didn't laugh back. Daniel didn't notice the tension right away. He gave Luke a casual pat on the shoulder. "Good to see you, kiddo." "You too," Luke replied politely. Emily felt the emotions from last night rushing back: loneliness, exhaustion, buried frustration. And now, standing in front of the man she loved but had felt distant from for months. She realized she couldn't hide anymore. She couldn't pretend everything was fine just because he walked through the door. It wasn't his fault entirely. Life, work, responsibilities, they had slowly built a wall neither of them discussed. But that wall had hurt her deeply. And she couldn't keep carrying that weight in silence. Daniel finally looked at her carefully, noticing her stiff posture, her guarded expression. "Mur, you okay?" he asked. She hesitated. She could lie. She could say she was tired or surprised or overwhelmed in a simple, harmless way. But last night had changed something inside her. Luke's words, his empathy, the way he listened. Without judgment, it all reminded her of the truth. She needed support, partnership, and real communication. She needed to be honest. Emily took a slow breath and stepped back slightly, her hands trembling faintly. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Daniel blinked, surprised. "Now?" "Yes," she whispered. Now Luke stood up slowly. "I'll go upstairs," he said gently. "You two should talk." There was no bitterness, no discomfort, just understanding. A quiet, respectful exit. Emily watched him go, grateful for the maturity he carried at such a young age. Once he disappeared upstairs, Daniel turned back to her with growing concern. "Emily, what's going on?" She sat down at the table and motioned for him to sit too. He did, looking more serious now. She took another breath. "I've been struggling," she said softly, "for a long time. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to make things harder for you. But the truth is, I've felt alone, really alone." Daniel's face fell with guilt and shock. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time I tried, you were tired or stressed or traveling," she said gently. "I didn't want to add to your burden, so I held everything inside until it broke me." Daniel's voice cracked a little. "Emily, I had no idea." "I know," she said. "But I need you to understand. I can't carry all of this alone anymore. I need you. I need us to communicate. I need to feel like we're still a team." Daniel reached across the table and took her hands. "You're right. I should have been paying more attention. I'm so sorry." Emily felt tears forming again. But these tears weren't from loneliness, they were from release. From finally saying what she had been hiding. From finally being heard. "I don't want us to fall apart," she whispered. "We won't," Daniel said with certainty. "Not if we fix this together." For a moment, something inside Emily loosened. The tightness in her chest softened. The guilt she carried eased. Felt a sense of possibility, a chance to rebuild, to reconnect. Luke's face flashed briefly in her mind, his kindness, his support. He hadn't just comforted her, he had reminded her that she deserved to feel cared for. And because of that, she finally found the courage to tell the truth to the one person she needed to tell it to the most. Daniel squeezed her hands. "I love you, Em. Tell me what you need." And for the first time in months, Emily felt like she could answer honestly. What happened the night before didn't create a scandal or a secret. It created clarity. It helped Emily find her voice again. It's brought her back to the center of her marriage, not by escaping, but by facing the truth. Luke's support didn't break anything. It helped her rebuild something she thought was slipping away. And that morning, with Daniel finally listening, Emily realized something. Healing didn't come from pretending. It came from courage. It came from honesty. It came from letting herself be seen. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope.